Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Dr. Tamara Plush from UNICEF, and I'd like to welcome you to a joint webinar with the Nature Conservancy and UNICEF on nature-based solutions, disaster risk reduction, and the Blue Guide to Coastal Resilience. Next slide. We have an exciting webinar ahead, as you can see, with speakers from the Nature Conservancy, including from Micronesia, and speakers from India, from UNICEF, and our partner from Roshni Center from Lady Irwin College. Next slide. To get us started, I wanted to share a little bit about UNICEF's work in disaster risk reduction. As most of you know, DRR is a systemic approach to identifying, assessing, and reducing disaster risk. This is often achieved by preventing new risk, and reducing existing risk, while managing for possible residual risk and through preparedness. At UNICEF, we aim to contribute to resilient development and are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai Framework for DRR, and the Paris Agreement. Next slide. At UNICEF, we have 4 goals: to ensure DRR for children and women, including those with a disability, is a national and local priority; to identify and address different risks, and to promote safer and more resilient conditions, especially for girls, boys, and women; and to strengthen humanitarian preparedness, response, and recovery through the capacity development of stakeholders at all levels. For those of you who are working at UNICEF, there are many ways you can learn and engage, including a new internal site for DRR coming in July, a new DRR Yammer you can join now, and we have a video on child-centered DRR posted internally. For everyone in the audience, I'd also like to highlight the Words into Action guidelines on engaging children and youth in DRR and resilience building. UNICEF developed these guidelines, and they led on developing these guidelines with more than 100 global contributors, including youth. The guidelines were released by UNDRR last year, and I'll put links to all of these in the chat in a few moments. Next slide. Around the world, UNICEF is often the lead UN agency for DRR and youth engagement, and in sectors like WASH, education, and nutrition. With partners like the Nature Conservancy, UNICEF is exploring ways to support nature-based solutions to develop highly cost-effective solutions that can reduce disaster risk and create co-benefits for children in nutrition, well-being, safety, and more. As one example, UNICEF served as part of the advisory board for the development of the Blue Guide for Coastal Resilience. And we're super excited that Moushumi Chowdhury is here. So to tell you more details, I'd like to invite Dr. Chowdhury from the Nature Conservancy to present on what is the Blue Guide. Now, as she's presenting, please add any questions you have in the chat, and we'll ask those at the end of our Q&A. So thank you, and over to you, Dr. Chowdhury.
Thank you so much, Tamara, and welcome everybody to this webinar. Really excited to be here and really excited to strengthen our partnership between the Nature Conservancy and UNICEF today. So just to begin with, in terms of our first presentation for this webinar, I will be presenting on the Blue Guide to Coastal Resilience and talking you through what is involved, what is included in this guide, and how DRR practitioners may find this guide very useful. So next slide, please, Eric. So I wanted to first start by setting the context. Many of you may know these statistics. So in the past 10 years, 83% of all disasters were triggered by natural hazards. 1.7 billion people around the world are affected by climate and weather-related disasters, and they're mostly in low-income countries. In 2020, which was just last year, it was the warmest year on record, one of the warmest years on record, and affecting 50 million people who dealt with floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires around the world. More than 40% of the world's population live in coastal areas, hence one of the main reasons why we decided to put the Blue Guide together. And coastal populations in particular are affected, their livelihoods are affected by storms, coastal floodings, and sea level rise. And as you may know, most of the climate vulnerable who do not have access to resources to adapt to climate change are disproportionately affected. And more people will require humanitarian support over time due to the impacts of climate change. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies predicts that in this publication called Cost of Doing Nothing, but that by 2030, 150 million people will need humanitarian support, and by 2050, it will be 200 million people. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us. Next slide, please. And one of the most powerful ways in which to take up this climate challenge and to especially build coastal resilience is by using nature-based solutions for disaster risk reductions, which is also referred to as eco-DRR. So eco-DRR involves the sustainable management, conservation, and restoration of ecosystems to reduce disaster risk with the aim of achieving sustainable and resilient development. Nature-based solutions, which I will present to you very shortly, are often low-cost options that help reduce the impacts of climate change. So for instance, in this diagram that you see, coral reefs in particular can help reduce 97% of wave energy that builds up due to a storm. Similarly, mangroves can reduce 66% of wave energy when storms come in. So they offer significant disaster risk reduction benefits. And of course, ecosystems such as coral reefs and mangroves support livelihoods and economies. Coral reef fisheries in particular are worth $6.8 billion a year and provide nutrition to millions of people around the world. And many tourists actually come to see coral reefs and mangroves as well. So they offer huge economic benefits to a nation as well. So the Blue Guide to Coastal Resilience primarily focuses on these types of ecosystems, which are fully natural and managed natural solutions. And it focuses on the importance of restoring and protecting nature to benefit from them in terms of reducing risks and reducing disasters. Applying nature-based solutions into disaster risk reduction planning, where it really helps to focus on anticipatory approaches to climate events. So we are planning way ahead in time before a disaster actually happens to actually restore these ecosystems, to protect these ecosystems so that we can benefit from them should a climate event occur. Nature-based solutions also encourages disaster risk reduction planners to shift from very short-term sort of reactionary, immediate support, which is absolutely necessary, to thinking about long-term planning and long-term adaptation, because it does take a while to restore and to protect these ecosystems. So it takes a lot of long-term planning and anticipatory planning to really benefit from nature-based solutions. Next slide. So the Blue Guide is primarily designed for DRR practitioners, and particularly those who are working in humanitarian sectors and supporting coastal communities. And this Blue Guide is also very much for DRR practitioners who are new to the concept of nature-based solutions. This could include technical experts and project managers who will be able to follow the various stages of this guide and who can integrate nature-based solutions into disaster planning, implement such plans and scale up good practices. This guide is also useful for government staff who are working with humanitarian organizations to focus on reducing disasters, as well as non-government organizations or international non-government organizations such as the UNICEF, such as IFRC, who are working towards supporting communities on the coast. We have primarily targeted DRR practitioners in humanitarian organizations and development organizations because they have successfully been able to lower the number of deaths from hazards. But the time has really come to make a transition from short-term reactionary support to long-term risk reduction so that livelihoods can be sustained in the long run. And there is a strong demand for this transition from humanitarian organizations to go into long-term planning and anticipatory planning. Next slide. So I want to take you now through the Blue Guide, and the Blue Guide has 8 steps, which is really the roadmap that helps DRR practitioners start to think about nature-based solutions and how to integrate that into disaster risk reduction planning. And throughout these 8 stages, the Blue Guide offers interactive tools for decision-making and case studies from around the world to show how nature-based solutions can make a difference. Next slide, please. So starting with stage 1, this is all about ideating and scoping. So the first question that this Blue Guide asks you is, what is the problem? What is the issue? What is preventing communities from being more resilient to storms or to floods, for instance? So it offers tools like the one you're seeing on your right, where you can start identifying sort of the underlying causes of the problem at the root level of this tree. And as you build up, it provides you guiding questions to help you understand or figure out what are the contributing causes of this problem? What is the actual core problem? What are the direct symptoms? And at the highest level, what are the high level symptoms of this issue? This particular stage also helps the user identify the context in which this problem exists, whether it's at the community level, whether it's an environmental issue, whether it's an external issue to the community. It also helps in terms of identifying an objective. What is it that you want to do? And hopefully the nature-based solutions can help you do that, and who you may want to partner with to solve the problem, whether it's governments, local leaders, other humanitarian or development organizations. Next slide. The second stage is all about how to engage others. And again, this is another tool to help you map out stakeholders. Which can help you identify who are the actors who can really advocate for nature-based solutions. So here you can map out who are your essential actors and who would strongly favor nature-based solutions. You have sections on who would completely not agree, so who would veto, people who have doubts about nature-based solutions, and people who really would drive nature-based solutions. So this is a very helpful tool for mapping. Next slide, please. Sorry, Tamara, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. I'm wondering if everyone's on mute, if you can kindly check, thank you. So in stage 3, this is all about assessing the context. So here, the Blue Guide, doesn't recreate the wheel. We very much use established tools and established guidebooks that already exist and draw from them. So for instance, we've pulled from, or we've really suggested to also use climate vulnerability and capacity assessment, which is a guidance prepared by CARE International. And this is a manual that offers a wide range of tools, and it offers particular strengths in terms of aspects related to climate change and inclusion. We've also encouraged using enhanced vulnerability and capacity assessment, which is also a suite of tools, but this is prepared by the IFRC and really helps you to understand risks and state of resilience. In this particular stage, we also look at ecosystems, and we offer sort of an in-depth cover of 6 different ecosystems. And this stage also looks at external settings and objectives as well to help connect the dots in terms of assessing community risks and ecosystems and external contexts. Next slide. So with stage 4, this is all about starting to help you identify solutions. And this is one of the critical parts of the guide. And as I was just mentioning, we have 6 different natural systems that we cover. Here you're only seeing reefs and mangroves, but we also talk about seagrass, marshland and swamps, dunes, and shelter belts. And this is just, again, a snapshot of what you can find in the Blue Guide. Next slide, please. So this is also a very critical part of the Blue Guide, which is the Solution Finder tool. And this is a virtual assistant tool that allows you to use your own data to help you actually find a solution. And I'm going to show you the website soon, where you can also find videos that will help you, it helps you kind of go step by step into this tool, and it makes you really easy to use this tool. So Eric, if you can just quickly click on the tool itself. Yes. So I won't go through this whole tool. It's quite, it takes time to use this tool. But I just wanted to show you very quickly that this tool has different stages. And this first stage is all about identifying, again, the objectives. So if you scroll down, Eric, you'll see that you could rank your objectives from high, medium to low. And you could also start thinking about, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to reduce exposure, decrease sensitivity, improve awareness, preparedness, enhance coping capacity, or raise adaptive capacity? In the next tab, tab 4.2, this is all about feasibility screening. So is it feasible to restore a reef? Is it feasible to rehabilitate a marshland, and so forth? Tab 4.3 is all about suitability screening. And here again, all these tabs essentially talk you through ways in which to figure out what is the appropriate solution for your specific context. I do want to show you, maybe I can, Eric, would you kindly go to tab 4.5? And here, this particular tab allows you to play with different scenarios because the climate will continue to change. So you can play with different scenarios as to how your solutions may change in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and so forth. So I think that's that's an important tool, especially for long-term planning. So feel free to play around with this tool. It does take a while, and it does take, one person is not able to go through the tool. It really takes an engagement from various stakeholders to use this tool appropriately. Next slide, please, Eric. So I'm not going to dive into this, stages 5 to 6. I think many of you are very familiar with the project cycle in terms of, making a plan, implementing and monitoring, analyzing and learning, sharing and expanding what works, especially what works. So I won't go into this because I'm sure that many of you know this, and we also provide guidance on this in the Blue Guide. So next slide, please, Eric. So I wanted to now quickly show you about the platform on which this guide lives. So Eric, if you could please click on that. Yes. So this is basically the website. And if you go to your left, you can download the Blue Guide by clicking the left toolbar, and yes, exactly. You can download from there, or you can download from further down into the page. But if you go down, Eric, on the page, so I wanted to show you that you can find out about nature-based solutions through a hazard or through the actual nature-based solution itself. So if you click on mangroves, Eric, and yeah, if you scroll down, so here you'll see a really great depth, a range and rich information on mangroves with various diagrams. And yeah, so diagrams like that. And then Eric, if you can go up again. Yes. Okay, thank you. And here on the right, you can go immediately to various case studies, to videos, And so this is a, and each of the 6 ecosystems are presented in such a manner that makes it very easy for you to understand what these ecosystems can do in terms of disaster risk reduction. Excuse me. So next slide, Eric. So I just wanted to briefly mention that the Blue Guide to Coastal Resilience is part of a 3-year project by the Nature Conservancy. And as Tamara mentioned, UNICEF is on the board, is on the advisory committee of this project. And this project is all about equipping government officials, DRR practitioners to better understand what nature-based solutions can do and offer tools and guidance. And we are implementing this project in Indonesia, Micronesia, and the Caribbean, but our knowledge products, such as the Blue Guide, is very much global in nature. So I think if you can go to the next slide, Eric, I think I will just end with that slide, just to thank the people who've worked on the Blue Guide, who've worked on the platform, and of course, our advisory committee, which includes UNICEF. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to answer questions as we go. Thank you. So let me now switch over and introduce Berna Gorham, who is my colleague at the Nature Conservancy for our next presentation. So Berna is a conservation planner who is based in Micronesia, in Yap in particular, in the Federated States of Micronesia. She's been with the TNC since 2015. And her initial work is in the conservation field, which started with her involvement in her community in Yap, when they were establishing a marine conservation area. Berna is passionate about her conservation work and contributing to ensuring healthy and sustained environment for future generations. As a Micronesian woman and mother, her work sits well with her traditional role as a nurturer, caretaker of the family, and knowledge bearer to next generations. Over to you, Berna.
Thank you, Mushumi. So the Nature Conservancy has been working to advance marine conservation with communities in Micronesia for over 20 years. Since 2006, TNC has supported the governments and communities in the region to achieve conservation outcomes under the framework of the Micronesia Challenge. The Micronesia Conservation Region is made up of 3 small developing states, namely the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, as well as 2 US protectorates, which are the Territory of Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. The region is a network of islands, seas, and forests that span 7.4 million square kilometers of the Western Pacific Ocean and holds some of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems. These islands are home to vibrant island cultures, including 8 traditional ethnic groups across the region. As TNC has worked towards the protected area goals of the Micronesia Challenge, we recognize that to enhance the effectiveness of our coastal and marine ecosystem management, we would need to expand our work to include broader management efforts beyond protected areas and ensure benefits to both communities and biodiversity conservation. This led TNC Micronesia to evolve its focus in recent years to include a more holistic approach to marine conservation that integrates ecosystem-based adaptation, fisheries reform, and aquaculture as part of our approach, positioning food security and livelihoods of Micronesians as central to achieving our conservation goals. Part of our strategy was looking beyond the normal partners and state actors as well as sectors that we had normally been working in, and finding leverage points for greater collaboration and partnership to enhance our work. This was clear in our 2020 plan, and then COVID happened, and all the islands shut down their borders to inbound travel, and none of our planned activities could take place. Next slide, please. The approaches and actions. The FSM, Palau, and the Marshall Islands remain COVID-free to date. However, once movement on islands were no longer restricted, I was able to pilot our diversity and inclusion work where I'm based in Yap. And this was engaging with new partners such as the Yap State Gender Support Office to target women audiences, and the Yap Catholic High School to target youth audiences. We were able to hold two women's learning exchange, the first taking place in October 2020, which coincided with International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And a second follow-up event was later held in March 2021 and coincided with the International Women's Day activities. The learning exchange brought together 10 community women groups, which represents women from across the main island and the outer islands. I worked with a team of several partners to plan and facilitate the two-day sessions around the theme implementing nature-based solutions to adapt to climate change and protect our local economy. The learning exchange provided a space for these women to hear about and dialogue around topics which had generally been mainly discussed with men. Through our partners, through our partnering with the Yap Catholic High School, we were able to support two contest events. The first was a video contest around the importance of mangroves, and it targeted high school students in the state. And winners were announced in December 2020. And the Yap Catholic High School has continued their outreaches to the elementary schools using these videos that were produced from the video contest and having their student team leading these outreaches with elementary schools. We were also fortunate at the beginning of this year to also sponsor a second event around the Environment Awareness Week for the schools. And this second event engaged kindergarten all the way to grades 12 students, submitting works in art, poem, and songs around the importance of keeping our environment healthy. And we were able to recognize and award our contest winners at the end of March. And shortly after the Blue Guide Toolkit was launched earlier this year, I was able to partner with two other participants from the initial training of trainers were also based in Yap. And we were able to roll out the first training on the Blue Guide Toolkit in region and introduce the toolkit to our DRR and conservation practitioners on Yap. Slide 4, please, the results. Part of the activity during the first Women's Learning Exchange was working with the women on how to develop a work plan and associated budgets for activities. And as an output from the workshop, a lot of the work plans that were developed focused on food security and soil management. TNC was then able to support each group with 1,500 towards their towards implementation of their work. Hold on. Can you hear me, Mushumi?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so we were able to support their work planning. For the Blue Guide, We have plans, to do regional training, but that's going to happen once borders can open up, and we could do trainings in the other islands which didn't have, initial trainers in the original training. And as for our youth, I hope we continue to have a budget because this uh, our ability to fund the women's work as well as engaging youth was really a result of COVID happening, and we had to reprogram a lot of our budget, and that was able to allow supporting having implementation money for the women as well as engagement with some of the youth. Next slide. Yes, so around the importance of some, hold on. Yeah, some of my observations, from this event that I helped organize, is the importance, for providing space for women to come together and share ideas and challenges, and really remain cognizant of our culture and social norms. Um, our work, should be contributing to empowering women and building their capacity without putting them in challenging spots. It's important, to work within our culture, especially of the place, and knowing each person's sphere of influence. An observation, during the learning exchange for the women was one lady sharing, the problem being faced by her community for their shorelines greatly eroding. And during the workshop, hearing about the conservation and watershed management activities being done by another community, she became quite upset with her own community leadership for not being active in bringing, their community together around the problem. However, over the course of the 2-day event, she recognized that by working with her own women's group, they could identify and include local plants that can help stabilize shorelines to grow in the plant nurseries that they had established. The other thing is partnering and collaboration is a must. And you would think that Yap, being a small island state with a population less than 12,000, that government and outside partners, with boots on the ground, would naturally be partnering and collaborating, which that's not happening. So for all these events that we had um, that I shared about this evening, we really invested time on the partnership relations, bringing in partners both old and new, and really creating an atmosphere that fosters greater collaboration around each other's work. Um, an observation during the Blue Guide training was that the training exercises were done, in teams. So at the beginning of the training, each team was asked to identify a local project or site which they were working with or are familiar with. One site that was selected was one of our outer island, and the issue that was being faced was the degradation and potential loss of the only terra patch that was available for that island. And this was due to saltwater inundation, especially after storm surges. But during, having a mixed team of conservation and DRR practitioners, as well as our Red Cross participants, they were able to identify green solutions such as replanting and maintaining coastal beach strand forests, and not just focus on constructing a concrete terra patch. Another observation, that I made during the Blue Guide training was the ability of the different partners becoming familiar with each other's engagement processes and the templates and recognizing, the common information that they're all collecting. This led to discussing ways of better collaborating and building on each other's work, sharing resources, and eventually reducing fatigue upon our communities with all the meetings and engagement. To have several partners, plus government not linking projects together, going into communities without project coordination eventually strains our community. And this contributes, to competing priorities, especially for our small island communities, and often leaving our communities confused with no real sense of ownership of the projects. Thank you very much. That's the end of my short presentation. I hope I didn't run through and it's understandable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. Berna Garang. That was so insightful and such valuable lessons. So I'd like to thank both you and Dr. Chowdhury for your presentations. If anyone has any questions for either, please write them in the Q&A, as well as for our presentation coming up from UNICEF India and our partners. So I'd like you to now invite Dr. Vani Sethi and Ms. Neha Abraham to speak from India. And please know that Mr. Sarbjit Singh Sahota will also be available from UNICEF India. He works in DRR, and he can also answer questions, so you can add those into the Q&A. And we'll answer all of those after the presentation. So thank you so much, and over to you, Dr. Sethi.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from the UNICEF India Country Office, from our convergent cluster of nutrition and DRR. We're going to, in the next 10 minutes, tell you a story of how we were able to connect the dots between two large-scale programs that were running in India, that is the Livelihood Mission on one hand and the nutrition flagship programs on the other. How we were able to put nutrition goals into the livelihood programs, and why livelihood programs are an important ingredient stakeholder in nutrition promotion. Friends, India is one of the countries which has one of the largest poverty alleviation programs in the world, where the central pivot is women's self-help groups, and micro planning is the core of this intervention. Women's self-help groups are aggregated as village organizations and federations. There are over 7,000 women's self-help groups, each receiving individual grants, seed grants for livelihood. However, the livelihood programs were suffering. And why they were suffering is that they were able to reduce income insecurity, but they were not able to reduce costs to health risks and nutrition security. Nutrition programs, on the other hand, were suffering because they were largely going on service delivery, behavior promotion, but they weren't able to do anything for good diets. And why? Because good diets requires money in the pocket. It requires income security, and nutrition programs and livelihood programs were not talking. And why were they not talking? They weren't able to understand the common linkages and the how-to of integrating nutrition goals into livelihood programs. Wherever women's self-help groups were engaged for nutrition behavior promotion, those were more voluntary efforts, and voluntarism dies down. So, trying to connect the dots that nutrition problems in the most poverty pockets of the country are multi-sector. You have income insecurity, food insecurity, there are problems of water, sanitation, there are problems of service access, and overall there's a problem of gender, violence, and also alcoholism in those areas. They are overall also very climate fragile. These are the areas that are most vulnerable to any kinds of disasters, natural or man-made. Service access in those areas is very poor. So what should be done? If the causes are multi-sector, if these two systems come together and we try to develop the programmatic know-how of how to layer multi-sector nutrition programs that are not only on nutrition promotion, but based on a communitized micro-planning approach where the women self-help groups design, implement, and receive grants to implement their own program. And we are able to demonstrate that in some of the poorest pockets of the country, we would be able to then scale that up slowly and gradually throughout the country. So, this is the story that we would like to share with you today of how we were able to bring multiple sectors together using the government systems, local institutions, local wisdom, and local resources to rest on a communitized multi sector program for improving adolescents and women's nutrition in the most deprived poverty pockets. My colleague Neha is going to walk you through the presentation. We have a small video to show you, and thereafter Sarabjit and myself will be there to answer any questions on scale, sustainability, and equity. Over to you, Neha.
Thank you. So today I will share some specific lessons on promoting nutrition-sensitive farming systems via the National Rural Livelihoods Mission's women's groups, and how this can serve as a coping mechanism against food and nutrition insecurity during emergencies. Next slide, please. I'll begin with an overview of the program. Swabhiman addresses nutrition through a combination of systems and community-led approaches which build on the existing social capital of NRLM's women's groups. Just to explain, the National Rural Livelihoods Mission is India's flagship poverty alleviation program, and this has a network of self-help groups comprised of women from the poorest households. And these groups are largely engaged in savings, credit, and income generation activities. So Swabhiman also seeks to demonstrate and develop programmatic know-how and assess the added value and challenges of engaging these groups for nutrition actions. So for the program, women collectives lead interventions to improve food and nutrient intake, prevent micronutrient deficiency and anemia, increase access to public health and nutrition services, wash facilities, and prevent early, poorly spaced, and unwanted pregnancies. Next slide, please. The systems actions for the program hinge on convergence of the livelihoods missions with departments providing these food, nutrition, health, and wash services, including the Department of Agriculture. UNICEF partners with local nonprofits for capacity building support and provides overall technical support to the program. Next slide, please. Since 2016, the program is being piloted in 5 of NRLM's poorest resource blocks in 3 states, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha, covering 356 villages. And thus far, it has directly reached over 155,000 adolescent girls and women. The program specifically targets adolescent girls, newlyweds, pregnant women, and mothers of children under 2. And it does this by engaging groups that are different levels of NRLM's federated structure. So it engages 5,002 self-help groups at Tier 1, 336 village organizations at Tier 2, 21 federations at Tier 3, and 62 farmers groups. Next slide, please. Learnings from the 2 intervention blocks in Bihar, that is Jalalgarh and Kasba in Purnia district, are particularly useful in the context of DRR. Of Bihar's 38 districts, 28 are flood prone, and the state also has a high prevalence of anemia, low literacy and education levels amongst both men and women, and a high prevalence of early marriage and gender-based violence. It also has severe deprivations and weak systems. Majority of farmers in the state have marginal land holdings that are lesser than 2 hectares, and there has been a shift to intensive cropping that has reduced diet diversity. So the Nutri-Sensitive Integrated Farming Systems, or NSIFs, was designed to target such small and marginal farmers. Next slide, please. NSIFs is basically based on the principle of collaboration and symbiosis, where input from one system becomes feed for another. And this is an organic process. It increases farm diversity and minimizes costs. The focus is on optimizing land and other resources and on improving quality of nutrient intake for the family. Promotion of NSIFs was supplemented by 5 new elements introduced into the working of women's groups, NRLM's women's groups. So women leaders were trained to engage on discussions using participatory methods. And in addition to receiving funds for livelihood and enterprise activities, they received community cash grants against food and nutrition action plans. Agriculture extension centers trained interested women farmers on NSIFs, who then set up model farms, which became peer learning sites for other women farmers. Adolescent groups were set up for peer learning and collective action on nutrition. And leaders were also trained to identify at nutritional risk women and girls so that their needs could be prioritized. The menu of loan use was expanded to promote Nutri-based enterprises and secondary education for girls. And along with this, the program also has a nested evaluation, which includes 21 indicators on empowerment that measure impact on women's access, knowledge, and decision-making. There is also a qualitative process evaluation to document evidence and inform future programming. Next slide, please. In addition to the women's groups, NSIFs was also further linked to the school system by setting up kitchen gardens at school premises and adding farming techniques to the school curriculums. The produce from these gardens were also used for school meals under the Education Department's midday meal scheme. In fact, if you look at the first picture on the left, the kitchen garden workers that you see in the pictures are also members of women's groups. So these multiple touch points in the community are aimed at bringing household level impact. Midline evaluation results in this regard have been promising. In Bihar, after 2 years of implementation, the number of mothers living in food secure households has increased by 2 percentage points, but there is a significant improvement of at least 20 percentage points in the number of mothers and girls who have a minimum dietary diversity score. Next slide, please. The program has this way attempted to impact the food system in a manner that is holistic, context specific, and is also climate sensitive. And this was done by harnessing local expertise and technical knowledge to first make the agriculture extension system Nutri-Sensitive and integrate these innovations into the livelihoods program and the school system. So what were the steps that enabled this? First, key stakeholders at universities, the community and government were mapped and engaged in dialogue to form partnerships. And second, appropriate platforms within each department were identified, leveraged, and convergence was then initiated. For instance, the agriculture extension centers already had a provision to hire a nutritionist or a food technology specialist. So this was leveraged to set up a nutrition cell to inform agricultural innovation. The agriculture extension system then provided technical oversight, modules, and training to take scientific innovations from the lab to the farm. And these were integrated into the Livelihoods Mission's current strategy for food, nutrition, and social development. Recognition of these programs by government departments enabled receipt of funds and to take the interventions to scale, which I will also highlight later. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 lockdown in 2020 lasted over 3 months across India. And so our team conducted telephone surveys to understand continuity of Swabhiman activities in the 3 intervention states. And this gave us some insights on resilience. The major challenges felt in the community included a loss of livelihoods, lack of access to markets, rising food prices, and a reported shortage of specific food items such as fruits, vegetables, food grains, and eggs. Across the 3 states, women collectives also reported continued development of Nutri Gardens, but we also found that these groups were involved in running community kitchens, doorstep delivery of vegetables, and provision of nutrition supplements or take-home rations as part of COVID-19 response. They were also able to leverage available social protection schemes and emergency funds to provide food, grains, vegetables, and eggs to nutritionally vulnerable groups. And third, the established Nutri-based livelihoods supported gap fill for disrupted nutrition and entitlements. Next slide, please. So overall, this is what we have learned about building resilience in hard to reach areas with fragile systems and weak service delivery. Prior investment in building capacities of community institutions, easy to access loans and social protection schemes, and facilities like grain banks enhance resilience against food insecurity during emergencies. building a complete ecosystem through incremental integration based on department priorities, which the previous speaker also talked about. This is what enabled adaptability. Next, investment in strengthening systems at the block level is what enhanced ability to adapt and respond. And we also found that for community-led multi-sectoral programs, we need to respect and rely on traditional wisdom, not rush processes, and identify and nurture champions already in the system. Next slide. So finally, the question of scale and sustainability. During the course of the program, a repository of standardized tools and operating procedures were developed for adoption in other geographies. And these were also translated into 3 regional languages. The school-based nutrition program has been scaled up to over 71,000 schools across Bihar's 38 districts. NCIFs as an intervention has been scaled up from 2 blocks in 1 district to 14 blocks in 7 districts of Bihar. And the entire Swabhiman package has been scaled to 10 districts across the 3 intervention states. And the program now engages 45,867 women's self-help groups. Between 2016 and 2021, the state rural livelihoods missions have contributed $4.48 million with a contribution of $1.27 million by UNICEF. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the larger questions of working with the system to build resilience. I'll end with a 2-minute photo film, which details the individual components of the NCIF's model being promoted under Swabhiman. I've spoken about some of these things, but this highlights how resources are managed for nutrition in the community. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. We're now going to go into the Q&A, which I'll invite Eric from TNC to stop his slides and to lead the discussion. And so if all of the presenters, which we want to thank very much, could turn on your cameras, we will invite Eric to lead the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi there. Well, thank you all for those great presentations. Really important work and really interesting work as well. I'll go back to Roshni for one of the first questions here. Roshni, do each of the solutions also come with examples of what species of flora would be appropriate for different regions or which have worked best in the past? You're muted, Moshimi.
Great question. I would really encourage the person who asked this question to visit www.natureprotects.org and dive into any of those nature-based solutions that's there, because you will find a wealth of information that gets to your question. The guide doesn't specifically talk about where these reefs are, or reefs or mangroves or any of the ecosystems are located in various parts of the world. It's not an atlas. However, it does provide really important information through case studies, through videos. So you will find videos and case studies, from the Caribbean, from Vietnam, from Western Indian Ocean, and a range of other countries and regions of the world, where it shows you where certain ecosystems are thriving and how they're benefiting people. So I would highly encourage you to visit the website.
Great, thank you. Berna, the next question is for you. The comment says, Berna, it's great to see that youth were involved. I'm wondering how much agency they felt they had in promoting nature-based solution efforts in their communities afterwards.
Well, I think the youth in our community, because when they do community plans, the youth are in there, but they're often because of cultural norms not as outspoken. So engaging them in this with through the schools and stuff, providing them with other opportunities, to gain knowledge on conservation, especially resource management, as well as helping build their confidence, to engage more, in the community management. Usually in our islands, the youth are involved when it comes to like the labor and stuff, they're there involved, but when it's at the decision making, they're not really part of it.
Great,
I
thank
hope
you.
that.
And I'll move to the next question for Nia. The commenter says, thank you so much for these knowledge-rich presentations. One question to the NSIFs. Were there any climate change impacts in these farms or gardens, for example, prolonged drought or irregular rains? If yes, how were they mitigated?
What actually happens is that extra funds to restart activities is provided by the National Rural Livelihood Mission to such families. At the same time, instead of only working on small farming, community farming systems are promoted and certain land is identified where the community works on the project together, and such shocks are preempted and support structures are created so that when the shock is about to happen or happens, the damage is much less. We have seen whether it is gardens or whether it is even the work that started on the pisciculture that started, it had to be redone after huge floods. And in Bihar, the area is very, very prone to floods. So you have to restart the whole activity. The communities lose their motivation. However, the beauty about the National Rural Livelihood Mission is that they have a vulnerability reduction fund. And the government, if you have a community micro plan, which you call a business plan put together, which we support them, they get those funds for revival. So the emergency, if the flood happens, the government then gives the fund to such communities. And if we are able to inbuild the business plan in the request the community folks give the government, they get the funds. So we had to build it thrice in one area in over a period of 5 years in Bihar. No one can escape such shocks. People who say they do, I don't know then what kind of programs they're doing.
Thank you. And maybe one more follow-up for Dr. Sethi and Ms. Nia. Nature-based solutions such as mangroves and reefs support nutritional intake through fishing. To what extent are communities you are working with involved in natural resource management to protect such ecosystems?
See, the design of the intervention is theirs, step number one. And it's not always going to be mangroves. It can be any other nature-based solution. And that is something we need to be open about. Our question was very simple. Why are communities undernourished? How can a family-centric approach be used? And the communities came up with a micro plan about what they felt the solution would be like. And we supported them through local institutions and resource persons to implement that solution. So in some places it was poultry, in some places it was only wash. They didn't need, and that was their solution. And in some places it was food through nature-based solutions. In some places it was forest foods, because we are also working in 3 of the areas where forests are food producing habitats. So if one solution is going to go across everywhere, then the communities are not involved in planning. If you have women self-help groups, one for every 1,000 population, you're supposed to have those many micro plans, because every community is different. And that bottom up plans has to get aggregated into a block plan, and they get funds for that. If everyone is doing the same thing, the idea is yours, it's not theirs. So even if you look at, I was very intrigued when we saw the guide which Moshumi presented, and that follows principles of community participatory planning, where you identify the problem, identify the solution, identify separate activities and actions. What we did is we also supported the communities in putting a budget to it, which oftentimes we don't, and an NGO normally comes and helps the communities work. Yeah, there was no NGO. The communities put together a budget, and local academic institutions and local agricultural systems that are already there in the country. Every block has an agriculture extension officer. They were linked to support. So our approach was using government systems approach and connecting the dots to move forward, but using participatory learning action cycles and a micro planning approach uh, to deliver this intervention. So you cannot have everywhere you have mangrove. No, you can't do that. Then it's your plan, it's not their plan.
Great, thank you. And this next question is both for Moshami and for Berna. In your experience, what was the key to maintaining the coastal community's engagement in conserving or taking care of the sites, especially mangroves and seagrass, other than direct benefits or remuneration, if any, assuming that they were available? And maybe Berna, ask that to you instead of Moshami.
Well, here in Micronesia, we work like my job. So I work directly with our community, you know, in a participatory process, you know. So they come up with with this with their community plans, and you know, like I said at the beginning of my presentation. PNC, you know, when it started working in the region, was really focused and brought support, you know, directly down to the community level in building capacity, and that's how I got involved, you know, with conservation. So for us, you know, the uh, mostly, you know, the lands and the nearshore waters are for many of the islands in Micronesia are still owned, you know, under traditional tenure system. So we found that, you know, the communities that that we've supported, you know, their idea that, you know, the initiative came from them to create, you know, a marine conservation area as an solution, you know, to addressing the decline in their fishing ground. Those are the ones that are more successful and remain engaged because they see the work as their work, you know, just like Dr. Sethi was saying, that they recognize it, that it's the work that they're doing is a continuation of their stewardship as part of their cultures as landowners.
Great, thank you, Berna. Roshni, a couple of questions related to the tools in the Blue Guide. So a comment and the question here, I've seen in the past that academic organizations like Stanford had created tools for helping to put a cost on socioeconomic indicators when biodiversity is reduced on land. Is there a similar tool for costing impact of similar damage that happens in blue waters?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, there are so many tools out there. I do want to point out to one important database that I actually always go to when I'm trying to look for certain types of tools, such as the one that you're looking for. It's called the ndcppartnership.org, and I will put it in the chat. So this is the nationally determined contribution, which is NDC partnership. And so they've put together a great database where you can look up certain tools. And I actually did a search, and I entered economic recovery, ecosystem adaptation, and analytical tools. And it gave me a list, and I can already see that there's a list for analytical tools for supporting green economic recovery that might answer your questions. There are tools for climate and disaster risk screening tools that may also answer. So I would encourage you to look at this specific database, which I'll put in the chat, for you to search for the tools that you're looking for.
Great, thank you, Roshni. And I'd like to give Nia and Sabijit an opportunity to comment on any of the questions that have been posed, or anything else that you feel is important to share before we move on to closing. Okay. Oh, Nia, it looks like you are on mute.
No, I was just going to say I have nothing to add, but perhaps Sarabjit sir might want to add, talk about the work with the National Rural Livelihoods Mission in Kerala, since that is a coastal area.
Sorry, I missed the question. Eric, is it possible to repeat the question?
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to any of the questions that had been posed, or if there was anything top of mind for you that you would like to share.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think one of the things which we have noticed in our work, particularly which Vani and Neha and other partners are doing, is that if we want to be climate resilient, we have to work on larger number of systems, right? From production to harvesting to marketing to use and absorption and so on and so forth. So you have to look at the whole system. Otherwise, if you work only in part of the system, then it doesn't work as much as necessary. And work across various systems. Second part, I think one of our challenges is that many times we have projects, but ecosystem-based work requires longer-term investment and engagement, and I think that's always a challenge. And I would also love to hear your perspectives on how do you deal with the, and what's the minimum amount of time which you require to work on coastal systems, for example, to ensure that they stabilize and they become productive, and communities are constructively engaged in the regeneration of the ecosystems. So that's the question which is still on my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I will try and answer your question before we close today's webinar. I mean, that's an excellent question, and this is a tricky one because it takes a while to restore ecosystems. So if you already have, let's say, a mangrove system that's under protection, that's slightly easier to do because you already have the governance structures in place to help manage that system and to protect it and to benefit from it. But if you're trying to restore from a very degraded system, it would take certain steps. For instance, you would first have to see whether it's even viable to restore that particular ecosystems. Is it worth the time and the money and the effort to do this? If not, you might have to look into other solutions. That could be in the form of a hybrid solution, or it could be in the form of integrating both what we call gray and green infrastructure, where you have seawalls, but you also have restored mangrove systems. So because mangroves could take a couple of years even to fully mature, so that you can fully benefit from them. So you can have a combination of gray and green infrastructure as well. So there are different solutions. We are just today here presenting one type of solution, which I think is really becoming more and more on top of mind among those of us who work on climate change adaptation, even at a very global level. The UN conference on climate change, which happens every year. This year, nature-based solutions will be a critical topic. So it's really coming to top of mind for negotiators, for government agencies, because it is a low-cost solution. But yes, you may have to combine it with other solutions. It's not the end all and be all. But we are promoting it because it offers so many benefits beyond reducing disasters. It offers socioeconomic benefits, nutritional benefits, which we've been talking about today. So I hope that helps in terms of answering your question. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the presenters here today for their time, for giving their such insightful comments and sharing all the really hard work that everyone's been doing. So thank you so much for that. I would also like to say, or emphasize, the importance of working with communities, as both Neha and Berna pointed out. Even though the Blue Guide to Coastal Resilience is primarily designed for disaster risk reduction practitioners who may be working at the national level or subnational level, they still need to engage with communities. It's not possible to use the Blue Guide just as a practitioner, as a planner. So engaging with communities where climate change adaptation actually happens and disaster risk reduction actually happens is absolutely critical. And I think we've made this point clear in today's presentation. I do also want to say that this webinar has been fantastic because it really cuts across so many different sectors and boundaries. We've talked about climate change, we've talked about disaster risk reduction, nutrition, economic livelihoods. So this was great in that sense, and I think we need more and more of these kinds of conversations to cut across these boundaries and these sectors. And finally, I want to say that, you know, this has been really fantastic to present with UNICEF colleagues and to have so many audience members from UNICEF here today and India at large. And I put in the chat the various areas where TNC is working in India, which you may find of interest. You know, we're working on cities, climate change, food and water, land and water in India. So please do check out the TNC website that I posted for more information. And I'm really looking forward to developing a stronger partnership with UNICEF. Thank you so much. Tamara, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our amazing panelists. And I want to thank everyone who is joining us today. We invite you to learn more about nature-based solutions, disaster risk reduction, and coastal resilience. And we'll let you know when the slides and webinar are posted. We'll send you an email so you can share this just a fantastic information-driven presentation that everyone has presented today, and you can share it widely. So we appreciate all of you for your time and passion for the work that we're doing here. So I want to say, have a great day. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.